Twitter thread that broke out recently in a way that I had not expected it to evolve. So originally I had written a story, or I had reblogged a story from, I think it was Mainichi Shimbun, about a group of Muslims in Beppu, the city of Beppu in Ooita Prefecture. And they were moving to basically create an Islamic cemetery. And one of the men who is behind this project is actually a naturalized Japanese citizen by the name of Saeed. And Saeed actually he's been in Japan since like 2000. And he actually lost a son in 2011. And there's a specific burial custom in Islam that you have to follow. And he was able to bury his son with permission of a local Catholic church who had space and allowed him to take a plot from the church. So that was good at the time. That church's plot filled up. And so a group of Muslims are now trying to work to establish an actual official Islamic cemetery. And they've run into not legal problems. So legally, they're obeying all regulations. This plan is good to go. They're running into resistance from the residents who are worried about like what happens during an earthquake. They're worried about, maybe your sanitation things, how legitimate those concerns are, or how much rooted in not understanding. I don't know. But Japan is currently a country with an incredibly high rate of cremation. I think I saw the stat was 99.8%. Basically the norm. So, burying is not the norm, but there's, again, Catholic cemeteries, Christian cemeteries, there's precedent for it. So I wrote about this and we got pretty good feedback. And I just knew when I wrote about this that somebody was going to come up with some Islamophobic. It took 10 minutes for it to come up.
At least it wasn't 5.
So this person, who will now go unnamed, you can track them down if you really want to, had said, very sad story, but it's a hard no for me. Japan has been able to maintain their culture so far, and once they start allowing people from other cultures to impose their own cultural practices in Japan, it's the beginning of the end.
Dun, dun, dun.
And then the kicker: the government should give them money to fly out.
Give me a free plane ticket.
Said about a man, let me point out, who is a Japanese national now. He is a citizen. This is his home. Japan is his home. So this is just an appallingly terrible comment, to which I point out, this is his home, and that I don't think that Japan is so fragile that its entire 2,000 plus year culture is going to perish because somebody makes an Islamic cemetery.
I mean, did it happen when the Catholics came?
Apparently not. I mean, the country's still kind of ticking.
Yeah, I didn't think so, right?
Yeah. I mean, there was a more historical, background of, a lot of anti-Christian oppression that happened, of course, during the Tokugawa era, but, everyone kind of got past that era. And there's so many angles. Once you get a brush of this story, I have like half a page of notes about this. But like just going from the religious angle, talking about this man's rights as a citizen, because he is a Japanese citizen now, and there is freedom of religion granted in the Japanese Constitution. And that is not, by the way, if somebody wants to start piping up and be like, oh, that's part of the wartime Constitution. It actually is not. It was part of the Meiji era Constitution as well. There was a nominal granting of freedom of religion under Meiji, though you had to also practice Shinto rites at the same time. It's one of those. Yeah, you can have religious freedom, but yeah, you're going to do Shinto as well too, right? And Meiwaku kind of thing. Meiwaku kakenai ne kind of thing. That tradition of religious freedom is carried over, and there's not like too much that can ultimately be done here. At some point it's going to be, like, if you're blocking the rights of Muslims to have, proper burials in Japan, you're going to be basically butting up against their constitutional rights. And I can see how that would ever stand up in court.
The moment somebody comes in and says something inflammatory coming out of bigotry without even bothering to Google,
right,
is there a Muslim community in Japan? It's that easy to Google, and then you will see several pages. What is it to that person? Why did they feel that they had a say? Why did they feel their opinion was relevant at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and what I don't get is I don't get this whole view of culture as this thing that exists right now, right here, and it's got to stay this way forever. It's this view of culture that says, like people do this with Japan all the time. They do it with America and other countries, but they do it a lot with Japan.
Yes.
And they basically say, Japanese culture is essentially they're treating it like it's a painting in a museum. It's done, it's finished, it's on the wall. Don't touch it. Don't put your grubby hands on it. Don't change it. And it's like, what is considered like Japanese culture has changed over time.
Wasn't one of the old punishments to boil people alive in oil, boiling oil?
Was that an old Japanese punishment?
Like, I know that it's in some myths. It must have come out of somewhere. So so are we supposed to like go back to that? Like, is it the 1960s? Is it the 1690s? What time are we supposed to go back to? Like, when does culture end? And do we get iPads? Do we get iPhones with that? Like, you cannot have one thing or the other. Like, either everything evolves or you get stuck and you just I don't know, build a time machine. I don't know.
The whole notion too of like a united, I think we've talked about this before, but the whole notion of united Japan, it basically goes back as far as the Meiji era. It goes back to the late 1800s, and that's as far back as it goes. You want to look further back than that, you're talking, okay, let's talk about the Sengoku Jidai, which was 127 years of civil war, basically.
Yep.
And then let's talk after that about, the 257 years of the Tokugawa era. Well, that was not a united Japan. That was Tokugawa using force and kidnapping and threats to keep the daimyo under control. And he had to do that because the daimyo were all separate nation states. And if one of them got too powerful, they would overthrow the shogun. And honestly, that's exactly what happened. That's Satsuma and Choshi decided that they were done with the shogunate at some point, and that's what brought in the Meiji Restoration. So which points of those are Japan, quote unquote?
I don't know. Like, do they decide like arbitrarily? Is it like a time and space, like this day at midnight from this? I mean, who decides what is Japan? Right. Like, not even a single Japanese, but not even Suga decides what Japan is.
No. And it's funny because it's like there's a lot of things I think that people would like look at Japan and say, oh, well, that's like very Japanese. Like the good example I have is Zen Buddhism or Buddhism in general. People are like, oh, that's really Japanese. And, first of all, it's a cultural import from India by way of China. Not even Zen is a completely homegrown sect. It comes from Chan in China. What's interesting though is that with Buddhism, there's this whole thing that happened over history with the Shinbutsu Shugo. So Shinto and Buddhism kind of became syncretic and started blending into each other. And at some point in the Meiji era, so the Meiji era's whole thing was they were resurrecting their own version of Shinto as a national religion, and so they tried to kick Buddhism out. There was the Shinbutsu Rime, which tended to basically split Buddhism apart, call it an alien religion, and completely boot it out of the country. And it was too late. And it was so embedded in the culture, it failed so spectacularly that they had to give it up. And that's how actually freedom of religion in the Meiji Constitution came about, was because they realized they couldn't get rid of Buddhism. It's like not even like the Meiji leaders who were completely re-architecting the country from scratch legally could decide what Japanese culture was.
Yeah, and not only that, like if we are going with like, okay, Japan equals Shintoism and Buddhism, like Buddhism has its good size, but at the same time it has also grown into several sects.
Many sects.
And the one that I'm thinking right now is the Aum Shinrikyo, which caused like I don't know how many deaths in 1995, I think.
Right.
With the Sarinjiken. I mean, we cannot just say, okay, this is native Japanese because it was created by a Japanese person that equals good. Like in that case, it equaled terrorism.
Very bad. Literally.
Yes.
And that was one of the ironic things, because that person in that thread automatically started, she just brought up, she or he, I don't know their gender, I should assume. They brought up the recent knife attack in France, which I believe was committed by somebody who identified as a Muslim. And I'm like, the largest religious terrorism incident that has happened in Japan to date was from a native Japanese cult.
Yes. Yeah, and not even that. So you can blame any crime on anyone's religion, but at the end of the day, I'm sorry, whatever your religion is, I'm sure your hands are not clean of blood. Even the most Catholic white person, what do you call them? WASP,
yeah, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Yes, even they had their own stories with how they went through, I don't know how many countries with the Crusades. I don't know.
Right.
Come on.
Yeah.
It's a little bit too late to go around pointing fingers. Yeah, your religion did this. Well, your religion did that. Just live and let live.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much every religion you see is going to have some sort of bloody history in its past. Yeah. And Buddhism's no exception to that.
Yes, either, right? Absolutely. Yeah, and the fact that it's from Japan, that it's outside of Japan or wherever, as long as you are not hurting anyone else, as long as everyone around you is okay and you are okay, who cares? Who cares?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly where the Muslims in Ooita Prefecture are coming from. Somebody else pointed out on that thread as well. There was a lot of fantastic comments on that thread, and people just kind of ran with it. One of the people noted that Ooita Prefecture is actually very much a melting pot prefecture, and that they've been doing things like this for decades. People work together. There's a huge foreigner presence. There's a sizable Muslim presence. Everyone works together and accommodates. And Japan does what Japan always does, which is just make a little room. In general, I actually think Japanese culture is very good about it. And I think it's why it's ended up being such a syncretic culture. There was a really great comment by Jason True on Twitter that was yes, the famous homogenous Japanese culture. Just today, I had my traditional Japanese breakfast of cafe latte and rye campagna with Dutch Gouda. On my way to work, passed by a Buddhist temple whose roots are Indian by way of China. I arrived by a train, introduced via Europe.
Yes.
It's great.
Absolutely, yeah.
Nice, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That is. Mwah.
Yeah, I love that too. Is that with trains, there's tons of train enthusiasts in Japan. It's a major hobby.
Yeah.
But a totally imported one, obviously.
And do people expect anyone to just go around wearing kimonos nowadays with a chonmage? Come on.
Yeah, and the thing is, nobody. I go off on this all the time. Nobody brings up the stuff that came from. That Japan took from Western culture that was outright misogynistic, for example, right? So there's a lot of Meiji laws were like that. The Meiji laws were more or less built on French and German laws, largely French, German prudence with a bit of German, and that whole the discussion about spouses having separate surnames, which is a huge debate now in Japan. It's a German law.
Yeah.
Originally, that was one of those crappy laws that they took from Germany, and
now even in Germany, it was no, that is bad.
Yeah, Germany did away with it. Yeah, but this whole conservative traditional viewpoint on the world that says, oh, this is our culture now, and it should never change. It's that was not even 150 years old.
The people didn't even have a surname. Surnames were not a thing for commoners.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We should go back to having one name.
Yeah. I'll just be Sachiko.
Yeah.
No, the thing is, what really gets to me is when people who could Google, they just go whatever, and they write something that will cause a reaction. Just why don't you take 2 minutes of your life and educate yourself before you throw a whole community under the bus?
Before you abuse us with your opinion.
Exactly. That would be so nice if
That
it
would
was.
be.